Greetings, this is dslyecxi, and today we're going to talk about the Ground Branch tech preview that was recently released. We'll start this off with a quick look back on the history that's brought us to today. Once upon a time, there was a Kickstarter for a game that promised to be a crowdsourced tactical masterpiece for the ages. People who were disenfranchised by the direction that Rainbow Six and Ghost Recon's series had gone hopped on with enthusiasm, dreaming of a return to how it should be, the good old days. That game was Takedown Red Saber, and it was kickstarted successfully. Shortly after it made its Kickstarter debut, a different game attempted the same thing, only to fail, in part because the media and momentum of the Takedown Kickstarter had dried up that funding well temporarily. And that game was Ground Branch. Takedown, to put it charitably, would end up being released in a rather shoddy state. It was a dream that had floundered and failed in a fairly spectacular fashion. It was awful. But Ground Branch would continue slowly forward. It was a passion project by a few people that believed they could create something spiritually similar to the old days of series that had long since left the realm of hardcore tactical realism. Ground Branch has been gestating a long time. The first I remember of it is probably back around 2007. And since then there have been drips and drops of progress shown, a screenshot or two here, some talk about feature development there, a model showcase. But it was clearly the progress of a small group of people attempting to tackle a very large project. But today, finally, we have a tech preview for the game. It's something to give people a first impression of what the finished project might be like. It shows where the investment of time and design energy has gone over these last years. It isn't a demo in the traditional sense of things, though one is forthcoming. There's not much to do in it, but it does give an idea of what direction they're taking and their ambitions. So with all that being said, let's take a look at what they've offered here. There's one caveat to note. Talk is cheap, and there's been plenty of talk about Ground Branch over the years. Talk doesn't impress me, but actual implementation does, so we'll focus purely on the things that are here and can tangibly be tested. Starting off, the first thing that struck me was that the art quality was functional, but it certainly wasn't pretty. I seem to remember the screens in the past looking better than this. Maybe it's just a passage of time that makes me think that. The example you're most likely to see of this is found when using the loadout creator. The actual base functionality of that is interesting. You can select different pieces of kit, you can customize the colors of gear, choose and customize your weapons and attachments, and modify the placement or quantity of different pouches and such on your rig, but it all looks very dated visually, and the actual UI for it isn't that fantastic. I mean, it remains to be seen what any of this will mean in actual gameplay, but strictly from a visibility and usability standpoint, it doesn't set the best tone. The included maps are quite small. It's kind of hard to get a sense for whether they currently have the capacity to create the kind of environments you'd expect from a Rainbow Six, Infiltration, or Ghost Recon era game. Of course, it is just a tech preview, but I think you'd want to present something a bit more meaningful in the map department. There's really not much to talk about here. There's a small shooting range, a small CQB environment, and a small outdoors environment. There's also the team room, but we'll get to that later. The weapons and weapon handling are the most significant aspects of this tech demo. So let's get the bad stuff out of the way first. The recoil is crude and barely perceptible. As you can see here on full auto, the weapon simply shifts slightly up and right. There's just nothing at all interesting about the current recoil implementation. The way the weapon sways when moving at a roughly jogging pace is a bit goofy as well. Maybe it'll work out in gameplay terms, but it looks kind of silly. The character movement system that they've implemented is a bit rough at the moment, which isn't surprising considering, again, the tech preview nature of this. The fact that you can bunny hop around indefinitely speaks to the very much work in progress nature of it. Now, you can free look to see your own character, and that's pretty cool. And actually, if you free look onto the EOTech site, you can adjust the reticle brightness up and down via mouse wheel. I do hope to see the basic functionality applied to something a bit more meaningful, perhaps for other attachments or other sights, maybe changing how your laser sight, what mode it's on, something like that. On the weapon handling side of things, tactical and retention reloads are implemented. So if you tap your reload key, you'll do a tactical reload, which is where you're dropping the magazine in the process for speed. While if you hold the reload key, after a brief delay, you'll trigger a retention reload which you store the partial magazine before reloading a new one. If you do that tactical load, you'll see the actual drop magazine down on the floor. Being able to pick up a drop magazine seems like a pretty easy thing to add into it, so I would expect to see that in the future. Bullet in chamber is represented. If you do a reload on a loaded chamber, you'll end up with an extra bullet. And these are all nice touches, but as with everything else, it remains to be seen what gameplay impact they have. As to your weapon sights, the available sights are a mixed bag. The worst representation of them has to be the ACOG, where they're trying to use render to texture to get this Red Orchestra-esque scope effect. But they don't pull it off. It's a mess of low resolution, extremely low field of view, and very low clarity. And it's something you would certainly not associate with a real ACOG. It's interesting that the actual scope here doesn't hit where the sights show. Switching between the backup and scope views shows significantly different points of aim, with only the iron sights actually being accurate. but that's kind of a minor thing compared to the core functionality of this site. Now, the way sights are controlled is interesting. The mouse wheel is used to cycle between different viewing modes while in sighted mode, which Ground Branch is calling engaged. So while you're in that engaged mode with your weapon up, the mouse wheel down will cycle between sighted and unsighted modes, while mouse wheel up will do the same if your weapon doesn't have backup sights, but if it does, you'll move between the primary and the backup sights. In the case of the ACOG, this is looking through either the scope or through the peep sight on top. It's a nice way to control it, and it makes good use of the mouse wheel. It's pretty clever. The other aspect of weapon handling controlled by the mouse wheel is the ready stance you take, so when you're not engaged. This is either a high or a low carry, and that's done via mouse wheel up and down while not in sighted mode. It's another clever use of the mouse wheel, but it remains to be seen what significance this will have in gameplay terms. And that's about all there is to talk about for this one. You can't use sidearms currently, and grenades also seem to be absent. There's certainly some nice ideas here, but as a whole, it's not a great deal to go on. There's not as much on display as I'd been expecting. The Team Ready room is essentially a promise showcase. You can see point of interest after point of interest that talks about how the game's envisioned to work, but doesn't currently work. There's certainly some neat ideas described there, but ideas and implementation are different things, and I'm naturally skeptical of that. So this all ultimately boils down to whether this is something worth supporting, whether this can become something great in the future. My stance on it at this point is there's really nothing else out there currently that's taking this kind of approach to CQB games, so for that alone, I'm willing to give some benefit of the doubt. Now, do I expect to see this turn into a proper successor to things like Raven Shield or Infiltration? Not really. The distance from where they are to where they need to go is rather long, and it's going to take a lot of time, money, personnel, and endurance to get there. Whether they can build their studio up to the size necessary to really pull that off is a hanging question mark, and past history with Kickstarter-esque projects like Takedown makes me skeptical as to where this one will end up. Now, I'd love to be proven wrong on this one, but it's a case where only time will tell. This is dslyecxi, and until next time, take care, and good luck to the people at Blackfoot Studios with this one. Here's hoping.